So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first editing lesson of this course. I'm very happy to introduce you to some basic editing principles of videography. Remember that those editing principles are completely unrelated with if you're shooting with your smartphone or with your camera. Everybody, in my opinion, in 2022 needs to know how to edit. In the next and second installment of the editing category of this course, we're going to be discussing how to edit B-roll footage. But for now, we're going to be focusing on A-roll. So enough of talking, let's launch our slides and let's dive into this very important editing lesson. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to the 11th lesson of this course, in which we're going to be discussing how to edit A-roll. I am very happy to have you here because this is going to be a very and extremely valuable lesson for you, due to the fact that editing is one of the most important, again, skills to learn in our modern times. This right here is going to be our lecture outline. We're going to start with the introduction on what editing is and what are our goals for editing B-roll. Then we're going to move to the first step of editing B-roll and the second step of editing A-roll, and then we're going to close this lesson with a recap, because obviously there's going to be a lot of information here and it is very good for you and it's going to help you digest all of the information that we're going to discuss. Small parenthesis here, if you enjoy this lesson and you want to dig further into editing, I have a complete course dedicated on how to edit videos on Final Cut Pro, which is my program that I use on my Mac. So if you're more interested in editing, I welcome you to join and enroll in this course to learn more about how to edit. Enough of the talking, let's move to the introduction and let's start analyzing how to edit videos. Now, the first thing that I want you to know is that editing A-roll is way easier than editing B-roll. This is due to the fact that it is a step-by-step process that everyone can follow, no matter what editing software you're using or no matter how many files and different cameras you have to compose your A-roll. It is a step-by-step process and it pretty much requires no creativity. You can't display your creative muscles here. It is a not that much of a creative process. B-roll is very creative and it's a bit harder to edit. We're going to discuss it in the next lesson. But for now, know that A-roll is again a step-by-step process that doesn't require creativity, and it is a very, very, very useful skill to have in our modern time. I am going to be talking about how useful this skill is a lot in this lesson, so don't worry about that. Now, by learning how to edit and by mastering editing, remember that you enter a huge and unsaturated online market. You become very valuable in modern society because all of the information is moving around through video, and being an editor, remember that it is a job that is completely location independent. You can edit videos from whichever part of the world you want. It is completely time frame independent, so you don't have to be at your job at 8 o'clock in the morning and finish at 3 o'clock in the evening. You can do this whenever you want and however you want, and also there is no dress code. Obviously, you can wear your pajamas and make many figures a year from editing. So these are the cool factors of editing. These here are going to be our lesson outcomes. These are the things that I want you to know by the end of this lesson when it comes to editing A-roll. First, we're going to discuss about how to import footage, and when I say footage, I'm meaning both video and audio. Then we're going to discuss how to synchronize audio and video again to compose a basic A-roll, and then obviously the editing part, which is pretty much cutting and trimming. We are going to discuss about how to apply some basic cuts to our A-roll. Finally, we're going to close this lesson right here by me discussing some basic color grading principles when it comes to the exposure, the sharpness, and the saturation that you need in order to really nail your A-roll. One more thing before we start, I want you to know that you don't need any fancy software to achieve what we're going to be discussing in this lesson right here. This means that if you want, you can invest in a higher end pro software, just like I have done by investing in Final Cut Pro, but you can totally achieve the same result when it comes to what we're asking in this lesson right here from the built-in software in your phone or by downloading a free editing software from the App Store or Google Play Store. So please remember that no fancy software is needed. And that being said, we can move to analyzing the first step of editing A-roll. Now, the first step is obviously to import your videos and import your audio to the timeline, which timeline is basically the interface of your editing software. Now, before we discuss how to import and what importing is, I want to dedicate some minutes in discussing how you should name and store your files. Trust me when I say that if you don't name and you don't store carefully your files, you're going to be lost in a storm of different video and audio files during those years in videography. This hobby is tightly related in organization, and file organization is one thing that you should totally be aware of. I'm going to give you a small example right here on how I have sorted out my files for this course that I'm creating right now, and then I'm going to show you the exact footprint, the perfect footprint on how to name and store your files. This is very important, and this is tightly again related with editing. This is why I'm introducing you to these concepts in this lesson right here. So this right here is a screenshot from my MacBook on how I have sorted my files for this course right here. As you can see, first I number all of my folders. So number 1 gear, number 2 frame rate, number 3 camera movements, number 4 composition, and inside of each folder I have 2 again numbered different files. The first is the PowerPoint presentation, and the second one is the video file of the completed course. So again, the number and the type of file. But this is not the perfect way to number, name, and store your files. In fact, this is the perfect way to number, name, and store your files. This is the proper file naming footprint. I want you to screenshot this, and I want you to keep this and follow this for the rest of your videography career. Now, each word that you see right here, followed by the arrow, should be a different folder. So first, you should start by creating generalized to more targeted folders. The generalized folders on the left of your screen should start with the year. So you should create a folder, for example, named 2022, 2021, 2020, depending on when you have shot your files. Then inside this folder, create a subfolder with each location of the shoot. For example, my studio, or Italy, or Rocky Mountains, or mountain biking. Basically create a subfolder with the location of the shoot. Inside that subfolder, again, create subfolders of each day of the shoot. For example, 2022, Italy, day 1, or day 2, day 3. Inside those days, I know there are many subfolders, but this is the only way to stay organized and not lose yourself in, again, waves and waves of different footage. Inside the subfolder of the day, create subfolders with the different cameras that you have shot your footage. For example, Canon 5D Mark IV, GoPro, smartphone. And finally, inside the subfolders of the camera, create different subfolders with the different video files that you have. For example, you have a GoPro video file, and we need to name those video files according to the key activity that is shown inside there. For example, interview point 1, or swimming, mountain biking. These are going to be, again, our video files. So it should be swimming, or number 1 swimming .mp4 or the .mov. Trust me, this right here is an extremely important slide, and even if you don't continue this lecture, I want you to screenshot this slide and apply it to your videography life. It will make your life way, way easier. Now let's move to the more simple stuff, which is how to import everything to your timeline. Once you have sorted out your A-roll footage and you have located it, you just drag and drop it into your timeline, and it imports into your editing software. If you can't drag and drop it because you're editing from your smartphone, make sure to just press the import button. This will directly in your camera roll, and then from then you can just select the clips that you want to apply to your timeline. Another thing that I want to point out is that most people don't actually store audio like video, and this is a big mistake. Audio should be stored exactly like videos. For example, again, 2022, subfolder Italy, subfolder day 1, subfolder from the interview that you shot there, and then inside there, O1 with the name of the video and O1 with the name of the audio. In addition to that, I want you to remember that unless you're using an external mic to record the audio or some very fancy setup, usually the audio gets automatically synced with the video, so you could even bypass the next point that I'm going to make in this lesson. If now the audio is not synced with your video, you just should pay attention to this very basic editing principle that we're going to discuss right now. Again, if your video is not synced with your audio and you're using an external microphone to record the voice, it is very just easy to sync audio with video. This is why filmmakers have, again, those cutscenes, or this is why you see many people clap when shooting a video. This is because when you clap, you see in the video that there is a clap, and then when you're hearing the audio file, when you're listening to the audio file, you see that the person clapped. Then you just synchronize those two to match, again, the visual and the auditory aspects of a clap, or this thing right here clapping down, and you have perfectly synced audio and video. This is just basically how to import and sync video and audio. Very, very easy. Obviously, as I said, if you're shooting with a smartphone and a free editing software, it automatically syncs your video with your audio, so it is just another less thing to worry about. This is why smartphones are very versatile, and this is why I dedicated this course into smartphone videography. This was pretty much step one. I told you that editing A-roll is a step-by-step process. It doesn't require any creativity. It is just very easy work. So this is how in step one we sorted files and we discussed how to import and sync audio and video. So now it's time to move to the second step of editing A-roll. Now, the key parameter and principle of editing is obviously applying cuts, and this is what we're going to be discussing in the second part of this lesson. Now, of course, this is a fundamental part of video editing. It is very important for you to master how to successfully edit and trim a video, and obviously this is the part in which you want to invest most of your time and energy to master this part of videography. Now remember that when applying cuts to an A-roll, there is a simple and a complicated way, and I'm going to be introducing you to both of those ways right now. So I think that we should start with the simple way. Now, basically, when you're applying cuts to an A-roll, you trim the parts where the subject is not speaking. So you can see in your timeline, you're going to have the visual representation of the video and the audio. This right here is the audio. And when you see the audio flatting out, just like the heart monitor flats out when a person dies, then just trim here, trim there, and just remove the parts in which the audio is flat out, which automatically means that the subject is not talking. So we throw away this part, these get connected together, and this is a very simple way to apply basic cuts to your A-roll. Obviously, we need to remove when the person is done this, so these we remove repetitive words, and we remove segments that pretty much don't add that much to the story. If again the subject is just circulating around the same concept, you can remove it through editing. This is why we edit. In general, any awkward things we just remove from the A-roll. Obviously, there are some pros and some cons when it comes to the simple way. The simple way is easy and it is fast, and it is what most people apply when it comes to editing A-roll. And obviously, there are some cons. It is not the best. Going through the complicated route is gonna be the best for your result, and it could get exhausting for the viewer. If you trim down a clip with the simple way, if the viewer is enjoying a very big piece of content, it could get exhausting and pretty repetitive for the viewer. This is where the advanced way comes, and during the advanced way, we detach the audio from the video and we just fade the audio of the first clip with the audio of the second one. So pretty much we apply a different cut to the visual and the auditory subjects of this. So in the advanced way, we dig deeper, and pretty much what we do is that we desynchronize the audio with the video. So we completely bypassed the first part of video editing that we discussed, which is to synchronize audio and video. We completely desynchronize them, and this is where we can just change different camera angles. For example, we can change the primary with the secondary camera angle. And as a rule of thumb, if you want to go with this way and you have two different camera angles and two different, again, audio sources, remember that for every 30 seconds of primary camera angles, we usually add 5 seconds of secondary camera. This again increases the visual variety that we can provide to our viewers, and this increases the viewers' engagement to our videos, which is obviously very good and what we're striving in the videography hobby. Now it is time to talk about my favorite aspect of editing A-roll, because let's be honest, what we discussed up until this point is very mechanical, very step by step, but color grading is actually a part of videography and editing in which you can apply creativity and you can get very, very creative with editing color. Now, color grading is a broader term in which we discuss basically applying changes in the sharpness, the exposure, and the saturation of your. In each one of those three categories that were analyzed, sharpness, exposure, and saturation, you can further dig into subcategories to change more about these parameters. For example, exposure is further subdivided into highlights, shadows. Saturation is also further subdivided into vibrancy. So pretty much we change all these parameters to improve our visuals. In this image right here, you can see an example of a clip that is not color graded. So this is how it comes out from the camera, and this is what you get after applying the basic color corrections. So let's now move into analyze how to color grade and what you should not do. So first of all, here are some warnings. Remember that there is no perfect color correction. It is very, very subjective, which is good color, which is not good color. And this happens pretty much due to the fact that the color of your video directly depends on the tone that you want to deliver through this video. So I want you to remember that again, there is no perfect color correction. This is a very subjective field of video editing. I'm going to give you an example right here. This filmmaker, as you can see, has applied a warm tone in his video. He has color graded this clip to look warmer than usual. This is why the warm tone produces a more romantic and a more relaxing image. In addition to that, this is not that saturated, but it's also not unsaturated. The saturation is pretty much stable. He just increases the temperature of the clip, and the contrast is decreased. We don't want contrast to be applied when we're trying to deliver a romantic and a relaxing tone of our video. Now let's compare this with this color grading. You can see the original clip that was shot in the Matrix with after the clip, after the color corrections. You can see that in the Matrix, the filmmaker, the director, used colder colors. This is an action and an industrial vibe that you wanted to transfer to the viewers, and he did this with increasing the contrast. So you can see that the shadows are darker and the highlights are brighter. This is due to the fact that the contrast is increased, and he also used colder colors because we don't want obviously a romantic vibe. We want a more industrial and action vibe, which of course was delivered through the color correction of the Matrix. Now, obviously, as we said, you can get very creative with color grading, and there is no do's and don'ts when it comes to color grading. But when we're editing A-roll, and especially when we're editing interviews, which is the biggest part of A-roll, color grading is very, very straightforward. And these are some principles that I want you to pretty much have in mind and apply to your color grading when it comes to interviews. In general, I want you to keep that color that comes from your camera exactly the same, so don't change the tint, don't change the temperature. Sometimes we need to increase a bit the exposure, always decrease the sharpness, because video, especially that comes out of phones, has built-in increased sharpness to look better in the eye, but this we don't want, especially in interviews. We also decrease the contrast because we don't want a very dramatic tone when it comes to our interviews, and we increase our saturation. So these are 4 changes you can apply right now to your A-roll to make it look better when it comes to color grading. Increase exposure, decrease sharpness, decrease contrast, increase saturation. Now let's discuss about some common mistakes that are done in color grading. The first and most common mistake is that people apply too much contrast. When you have access to all of those different parameters to change through color grading, a beginner thinks and believes that he should change every single one of the parameters, and the first thing that they do is that they increase contrast too much. Increasing contrast too much, as you can see here, just ruins footage. It makes footage looks bad, and this is way better, especially for a headshot portrait that this photograph is. So too much contrast is definitely a no. A second very common mistake is that amateur editors apply too much sharpness to your videos. And remember, as a rule of thumb, I want you to only decrease the sharpness of your video. I never want you to increase the sharpness. This is simply due to the fact that too much sharpness makes your video look odd. It makes the video look awkward, and whenever is odd, something in your video is odd and awkward, it drives the viewers away from the story. And as we discussed in this course, throughout the story is king when it comes to videography, and we don't want our viewers to be distracted from the key story. So I want you to take care of the sharpness during production. How do I take care of the sharpness during production? Make sure that your clips are in focus. You make sure to have the correct lighting, and then you're not gonna need to apply sharpness in post-production. Just as we said in the stabilization lesson, I need you to remember that post-production editing is a last resort. We try to save and we're trying to improve and perfect all of the parameters before we enter post-production. Post-production is to apply some changes that couldn't be applied during production, and this obviously also applies to sharpness. The third and again very common mistake that people do when color grading footage is that they apply too much saturation. Again, the saturation slider is a slider that is usually available only to editors. You don't have a built-in saturation slider in your phone editing, like in the photo gallery, for example. So when you see the saturation slider and you start sliding it, it is very easy for you to just overslide it and add too much saturation. And from a first glance, you might think that it looks good, but again, it drives the viewers away from the story. It looks awkward, and to know the correct amount of saturation, this definitely needs some trial and error. So I encourage you to shoot and edit and shoot and edit and shoot and edit until you gain experience, because experience in videography is the most important thing. Now we're going to move to the final part of this step 2, which is just an additional part on how to improve your editing with just 2 simple clicks. And those 2 simple clicks is to add the letterbox effect to your A-roll. Now the letterbox, also called as cinematic bars, are those two black lines that are located on the top and the bottom of your clips, which just make your footage look more appealing. This has to do with the anatomy of the eye, the fact that we perceive the world in a landscape and not an horizontal aspect, and this just makes videos look more cinematic, more professional, more appealing. And as we said, more appealing videos are directly related to bigger engagement of the audience, and this is what we're looking for in videography. So please add cinematic bars. It is very easy to add them. Just Google letterbox PNG, you will download a transparent image and then go ahead and drag and drop it to your editing software. Add cinematic bars. This will improve your footage. Now we're going to end this lesson right here with some tips that I have accumulated again through the years in the trial and error that I have seen and observed through editing, and those are the 4 tips that I have to give you. The first one is to not try to perfect A-roll, don't over edit, revisit after you've done with B-roll the editing of the A-roll, and never export a project the same day that you launch it. So let's start with the first tip that I have to give you, is that you shouldn't try to perfect an edit, especially if it is A-roll. I want you to remember that at the early stages of your videography career, you need to go with experience. You need to put quantity above quality. Don't try to perfect your A-roll editing. Try to produce many A-rolls and you will learn through trial and error. I'm going to say this during this course, and I've been saying it during this course. Trial and error is the best way to improve in any. So again, don't try to perfect an edit. Don't overstress about an edit. Just produce much content. The second thing that I have to give you is not to over edit. This again, access to tools doesn't mean that you have to use them. It doesn't mean that you have to use every single effect that is built in your editing software. It doesn't mean that you have to change, again, the sharpness, the saturation, the highlights, the shadows. You don't need to apply all of those changes just because you can. I know that you might feel the urge to use every single tool that has been unlocked to you through paying for an editing software, but trust me, keeping it simple is your best ally when it comes to edit, because again, you don't distract the viewers from the story, which is the key of your video. The third tip that I have to give you is to actually revisit and re-edit A-roll after you've done with B-roll. Adding B-roll above your A-roll will directly change the flow of your A-roll and the flow of your story, so it might be a good idea to actually revisit the A-roll after you're done with the first edit of your B-roll. And we'll discuss about how to edit B-roll, don't worry, in the next lesson, but for now, I just want you to keep this tip in mind. The final tip that I have to give you is that you shouldn't export a project the same day that you launched it. No matter if you've done the most basic editing work in this project, just sleep on projects. So take your time, take a walk outside, think, reflect on the way that you edited this project, and just don't stress export. It is very easy for you to say after an exhausting day of editing, okay, I want to just export this clip, upload this, be done with this, but this is not the correct approach. This is not the mature approach. The mature approach would be to sleep on a project, and as you will gain experience in the field, you will know that when you relax, take a step back from your computer screen, go outside, take a walk. This will help you reflect again on the mistakes you made. This will help you locate many mistakes that you've done, and this will drastically improve the quality of your edits. So please sleep on your projects, don't stress export, and don't export the same day that you launched. Now, I want to end this lesson with this right here, which in my opinion is the perfect edit. Of course, we can see just a simple shot of this edit during this lesson, but let's go ahead and analyze this. First of all, I want you to reflect to the fact that it has the perfect sharpness, color, lighting, and saturation. Let's not discuss about the lighting because we have again a separate course on lighting, but you can see that the sharpness in President Obama's face, the color is on the direct temperature, the saturation is just on point. It's not unsaturated but not oversaturated. In addition to the lighting, produce this perfect image. I also want to point out some composition rules that also apply to this image, and this is why it's so satisfying to the eye and so appealing to the viewer. The director in this case has applied the rule of thirds because, as you can see, Obama's left eye is located in the left leading lines of the thirds, obviously in this composition. And in addition to that, we also have the rule of leading lines because this image right here, in which I have the arrow in front of it, this arrow right here points directly to the eye of Obama, which is going to be the center of attention in this frame. So this is one of the most perfect interview frames that I've seen, and I wanted to discuss it with you. Now let's move to the recap. Again, this was a huge lesson, and I think that I stressed actually enough the importance of learning how to edit. So we talked about editing A-roll, why you need to learn how to edit, what is A-roll, and then we discussed about the wanted outcomes of the scores. So let me repeat them. The wanted outcomes I want you to remember after the end of this lesson is that I want you to know how to import files, and we discussed how to name, categorize, and import files to your editing software. Then how to sync audio and video, how to roughly cut and apply some basic cuts to your A-roll, and finally we discussed about the application of letterbox, how those cinematic bars make your video look better. We discussed about color grading and some tips to avoid, obviously, and some tips to do, and finally some tips that I have learned through my experience based on trial and error again in this editing world.